Welcome to July 6th, 2023 meeting of the City of Raleigh Appearance Commission. My name is Adam Walters and I am the chair of the commission. The Raleigh Appearance Commission is a public body appointed by the City Council that exercises both advisory and quasi-judicial functions. The Appearance Commission's responsibilities relate to zoning and other land use matters, as well as the visual quality and aesthetic characteristics of the city. Today's agenda includes requests for design alternates from the city's Unified Development Ordinance. When hearing requests for design alternates, the Appearance Commission sits as a quasi-judicial body and conducts an evidentiary hearing on the request. That means it's like a court hearing. State law sets specific procedures and rules concerning how this commission must make its decisions. The Commission's decisions are constrained by the standards in the city's ordinance and the facts presented at the hearing. The Commission hears and considers evidence presented at the hearing and applies the standards set forth in state law and the city's ordinance. The Commission must base its decisions upon competent material and substantial evidence presented at the hearing. If you will be speaking as a witness, please focus on the facts and standards, not personal preference or opinion. This meeting is open to the public, and everyone is welcome to watch. However, participation in the evidentiary hearings is limited. Parties have rights to participate fully. Parties may present evidence, call witnesses, and make legal arguments. Witnesses may testify as to facts to which they are competent to testify, so long as those facts relate to the legal standards. In addition, lay or non-expert witness testimony is limited to facts, not opinions. For certain topics, the Commission needs to hear opinion testimony from expert witnesses. These topics include projections about impacts on property values and projections about impacts on traffic safety. We'll now open the evidentiary hearing for item DA4 2022 on today's agenda. Casey, will you introduce this hearing? Before you get started, can I swear you in?
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, please proceed.
Sure. So the applicant reached out and indicated they plan to request a continuance to the September 7th meeting. I believe they're here this evening to update you all on the case.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Walters, members of the Appearance Commission. Samuel Morris with Longleaf Law Partners, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 302, here on behalf of the applicant. We are requesting that this public hearing be deferred to your regular meeting on September 7th, because since our initial hearing before you back in April, it's been determined that a variance is required related to the SHOD overlay on this property. In order for the development to move forward, we have filed that variance request. It's scheduled to go before the Raleigh Board of Adjustment at their regular meeting on Monday, August 14th. Because that SHOD overlay and the variance will affect the landscaping plan, which we do believe is relevant to the request before you all. The developer's goal is to get the variance and landscaping issue resolved and finalized before coming back to you all with the architectural request. The goal being to get that variance approved in August, come back to you all in September with a complete plan that's fully code compliant for you all to make your decisions based off of that.
Great. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
So we'll continue DA4 2023 to September 7th. With that in mind, we'll now open the evidentiary hearing for item DA5 2023. Is that which one we're doing? Yeah. Casey, could you introduce this hearing?
Sure. So this case was, the hearing for this case began at the June 1st Appearance Commission meeting and was continued to this evening. And so for the benefit of folks that maybe weren't present or viewed the meeting, I will provide a quick overview of what the case is all about. So the subject property is located at 121 and 131 South Boylan Street at the northeast corner of South Boylan Avenue and West Hargett Street. The property is zoned downtown mixed use, 20 stories with the urban limited frontage and conditional use. The applicant is proposing a new mixed-use building with structured parking and commercial and residential uses within the building. There are a number of design alternates that are being requested. These first few are related to driveway spacing and cross-access that were discussed at the previous hearing. The applicant is requesting to reduce the minimum driveway spacing between the proposed and an existing driveway on South Boylan Avenue, to reduce the minimum driveway spacing between the proposed and an existing driveway on West Hargett Street, and for relief from the cross-access requirements. We have your findings here for those requests. There are two design alternates related to transparency. The first is to reduce the ground story transparency on the building facade, facing South Boylan, and also a request to reduce the ground story transparency on the building facade facing West Hargett Street. As you know, transparency is required for each side of the building facing a public street, and in this case, 66% transparency is required on the ground story. We have your two findings here for the transparency design alternate request that must be met. And then we have two design alternates related to building massing. Those are for relief from the building step back requirement along West Hargett, as well as a step back request along South Boylan Street. Buildings 13 stories or more must have a minimum of 12-foot step back above the first floor, but below the 13th floor on the sides of the building that face a public street. And you have 5 findings for building massing that must be satisfied in order to grant the design alternate requests. And then the last request is related to the parking structure screening. They're requesting a design alternate to allow louvers to provide the screening for the parking structure. The UDO requires the landscaping and screening requirements are intended to provide meaningful and well-designed screening and buffering, and specifically require that louvers require a design alternate. And we have the 4 findings for landscaping and screening here that must be satisfied to grant that design alternate request. And with that, I'm available if you have any questions, and we'll hand it over to the applicant.
Thanks, Casey. Before the applicant comes up, I just have a little business to take care of. First, let's welcome our newest member, Jason Dale. Is it Jason Dale? And then Catherine let me know about something that we need to cover before we get started, which is if we have more than 9 members present, we need to make sure that the alternates that are in addition to 9 members do not participate in the case but can be here. So in that case, right now it's just Jason. If any other regular members show up, we'll identify someone else who can be here but not participating in the conversation. So yeah, the rest of the alternates will be able to vote on this.
So to clarify, we'll probably need to do a name vote when we get to that point, but Catherine Lawson, Dane Thompson, and Matt Griffith will be voting on this case.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Molly.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group, 421 Fayetteville Street. Here on behalf of the applicant, I'd like to start with a few introductions, and I'll actually begin with the applicant. I'd like to say a few words. We do have with us today Eddie and Wynn Coleman, principals with the applicant. They were also the principals, just for some background on them, for 2 projects that have happened in the city and that have received Sir Walter Awards. One being the residential restoration of 425 North Bloodworth Street in historic Oakwood, and another being an infill project, the Boylan Condos at 505 Florence Street. That's an 8-condo project. I also have with me today 2 of the project architects. Brian Bunce, he's a founding principal at BB&M Architecture. He received his Bachelor of Architecture at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in 1991. A couple of the key projects that he's worked on are the Radius Dilworth in Charlotte, which is a 26-story residential project, as well as the Chronicle Mill in Belmont, North Carolina, and that was an adaptive reuse of a historic textile mill. For this project, he is a managing principal, And we also have with us Nick Barnes, Associate Principal and Project Manager at BB&M Architecture. He received his Bachelor of Architecture at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in 2010. A couple of his key projects are Elizabeth on 7th in Charlotte. That was a mixed-use building in the historic Elizabeth neighborhood of Charlotte, as well as 222 North Detroit Office Building in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's an 11-story building. He is the project principal on this project. I would like to tender both architects as our expert witnesses today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I would also like to request that all of our submitted materials, including today's slides, be admitted to the record.
Noted.
Thank you. All right, so I will begin with the items we'll be addressing today. As you know, we were here back in June, and we had several requests that you've just heard recapped. We were asked to come back with respect only to these three that are on your screen, and to provide a little additional detail on these three requests. One moment. There they are. Okay, so with respect to the first request, building massing, there are 5 standards that support the request for the design alternate. I will warn you that the 5 standards become somewhat repetitive, not only within this request, but across the separate requests. So you'll see a little bit of that. Feel free to stop us at any point where you feel you're satisfied on a particular point. They do circle back now and again. So we'll start off with that first standard. And that first standard is really the root of much of that problem, because that standard is that the request meets the intent of the building massing standards. I'm sorry, I wanted to pause here because I realized, did our witnesses need to be sworn in?
I think we'll do it. Do you have so
As they
many?
come up.
Let's just do it as they come up.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the first standard is that the request meets the intent of the building massing standards, and there are 4 of those. Those intents are to provide access to light and air at street level, to mitigate wind impacts, to provide a consistent street wall, and to visually reduce the perceived scale of the building. So we'll address each of those first. And here on your screen, you see the shadow study at the summer solstice. And so to describe what is happening here, I will turn this over to Nick Barnes to tell us what's going on here.
Nick, will you just state your name, address, relation to the case, and then I'll swear you in.
Absolutely. Nick Barnes, BB&M Architecture, 1435 West Moorhead Street, Suite 200, Charlotte, North Carolina. I am a associate principal with BB&M Architecture and project manager.
Okay. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Do Brian right now as well. He's going to be kind of pitching in.
Sure.
Just get that out of the way, the formality.
Hi there, I'm Brian Bunce with BB&M Architecture, and I'm supporting Nick however I can today.
Just address.
1900 West Moorhead, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28208.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thanks. Y'all can proceed.
All right, we'll jump right in. We heard some of the concerns from the last meeting about the light and air, so we want to get started there. So what we've done is we've gone back and done a series of shadow studies to help everybody kind of understand the impacts on the street frontage in a scenario with the building massing that we are proposing versus one that matches the prescriptive nature of the UDO, and that's being represented in the bottom with the 12-foot setback. What you see on the upper left-hand side are our proposed setbacks. That being no setback on Boylan, and then a significant setback on Hargett Street for a amenity deck. Just trying to kind of bracket the timing of the sun study. We try to hit the highs and lows of the sun in key times to represent the most extreme cases on both ends. So this one being the summer solstice in the morning. As you can see, if Boylan Avenue is to the bottom left, there's a negligible difference between the two on the amount of shadow that the massing casts over the street frontage. And then again, Hargett being in full sun. Again, I'm happy to stop on any of these. Otherwise, I'm going to cruise through because we've got quite a bit of information. Next one, winter solstice. So again, looking at this in December 21st in the morning, same time period. Again, you can see very little difference in the amount of shadow that's cast. You can see a little bit of difference sort of mid-building. We've looked at sort of the street frontage and the cross-section, about 69 feet there, so it would have, again, very minimal difference between the prescribed massing with a 12-foot step back and what we are proposing. Next, going back to summer and looking at the Hargett Street elevation, the recess that you see in the upper left-hand model is what we are proposing as a amenity deck with a pool. So full sun exposure on this corner from a building massing and organization standpoint made a lot of sense. If we do look at just a standard blocking and massing along Hargett Street, you can see that we have the same amount of sun exposure there. And going again back to the full southern exposure in a December timeframe, the shadows do get a bit longer. The sun sets a little bit lower in the sky. However, there's no real difference between the two. Again, looking further, zooming in a little bit. I hope everybody can see our graphics okay on your screen. I know it's a little bit different for you all, but there are a few key places for multiple reasons that we're carving out along the Boylan Street and Hargett Street elevations as part of the design alternate, trying to get light to penetrate deeper into the building facade, into some covered spaces. Again, highlighting the need for active uses along that frontage, and having these recesses helps light penetrate deeper into the building. If you look on the far right, again, that is a prescribed massing that if we were to go by the book, so to speak, we would not be required to have that, and there's no additional penetration of sunlight into the building. Can I go the right way here? Okay. This is a rendering, a conceptual rendering of the lower corner that we were just discussing, about how we're beginning to carve away the frontage on that corner to activate it, but also allow penetration of light as the sun sweeps across the southern sky and then eventually to the face on Boylan Avenue. This is a rendering of the street frontage on Boylan as well, where we're looking to create really the frontage of the building. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, we'll get there. Really looking at the quality of life and light. You know, there's something that, is pretty dynamic of building as it lights up at night and it begins to change. We have street sconces, we have deep storefront recesses, high glass, and activated uses along this frontage. Here is a conceptual package looking at how we're going to creatively downlight the building in multiple ways by using various lighting methods. Again, how you light a building at night is just as important as it looks during the day. There's something special about a building that lights up at night as tenants get home and they come in and turn on the lights, and that building begins to come to life. That's something that we really want to be cognizant of. So we've looked at various very direct lighting strategies, trying to create a dynamic facade at night. Here's a conceptual drawing, maybe a little more technical than feel, but looking at how we can begin to highlight the architecture and the architectural elements across the facade to create, again, that dynamic elevation in the evening time and nighttime.
Can you just tell us what we're looking at here? Kind of.
Yeah, I apologize. It is maybe a little bit more dynamic, or I'm sorry, technical than. than feel. And we can zoom in a little bit for you here. What you see represented, apologize, I don't know if you can you see a pointer? Yes, you do for me. Yes, so essentially we're representing cones of light in ways that we would expect the light to wash over the facade. And we would try to keep that in a very narrow beam as to not have a tremendous amount of light spillage across the facade. But again, being very direct and deliberate about where we're putting light to draw people into spaces. For example, at the retail level, various levels, lower level at the street, or I'm sorry, lower height, as well as up high, and having, having materials along there. We'll talk a little bit later on about having masonry materials on there that have, again, some dynamic feel to it and some texture as they're lit.
And if I can clarify real quick,
Sure.
These lighting changes, these were not part of the design that we saw last month. Is that correct? These are new?
That's correct. So
Okay,
we kind of heard you loud and clear that there was maybe some more information needed. Apologize if we are coming in with a lot more. If this is redundant in any way, please just go ahead and give me the hand signal to keep moving on. But
Keeping track of the new things.
so yes, we didn't have some of these graphics. The idea of sconces and street lighting, we feel are important for engaging streets. This street will be evolving over time, as a lot of cities and streets in town are. So, presumably we could be one of the first along here. So we want to set a good precedent and keep a very light and safe feeling street along Boylan and Hargett. One of the other items I did want to draw attention to is we've gone through significant effort, and we'll get to it in a bit, to line Boylan Avenue with residential units. So what you see are windows to residential units. And this echoes back to my comments about having these lights turn on as people get home at night. There's an activation of the building as the evening sets in that is pretty dynamic for a street front. So we really looked at this building as, if you look at the snapshot here, a building of scale for the old neighborhood and bridging the gap into the new. So a lot of the lighting strategies are going to focus on these lower levels. Here's the same sort of diagram on Hargett. Again, using the lighting to highlight architectural rhythm and order across the facade, as well as highlight entries, deck entries, and other places that we feel like we need to create a engaging street environment should pedestrians be coming down Hargett Street and connecting to the building. Again, having a activated and light facade is incredibly important to having a safe neighborhood and feeling in a building that feels good, like it's part of the neighborhood. Here's a little bit zoomed in view of that for clarity. All right.
Okay, I just did want to clarify one point, Nick, if you could come back up. So I think we had the question about whether the sconces were part of the design. I understand they were part of the design, we just didn't highlight them previously.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that was the first intent of the building massing standards, is to provide that access to light and air at the street level. So we've really covered that both during the day and at night, how this building, this design, especially that corner opening, opens up the sidewalk to additional light. So we've covered that first of the intents. The second intent is to mitigate wind impacts, and we spent quite a bit of time on this in our last meeting. So simply as some background and framing, we did provide some information in your packet about who Windtech is. And like I said, this is just for framing. We are going to discuss the points that you see here separately. But so this is a wind consultant with an article out there about how to mitigate wind impacts and the different methods that one could use. And so there are a number of measures introduced here, and I'll go on to the first one. So this first one is perimeter trees, and here you see the article talks about the fact that these trees can serve as an effective windbreak and particularly reduce wind funneling between buildings. I'd like to call Nick back. And Nick, can you confirm for us that is correct and how that applies on our site?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the strategies that we looked at was instead of a 2-inch caliper tree, coming in with the tree locations that we were previously presenting, but proposing a 4-inch caliper tree, allowing for day one for that to be a larger tree to mitigate wind impacts.
Okay, thank you. So there was another factor mentioned in this article that large planters can further break up any wind funneling between buildings. And Brian, how are we implementing that on this site?
Yeah, so what we were committing to was 150 square feet along the frontage of kind of planters that will help in mitigating that wind funneling.
Okay. Great. So this is planned along both street frontages here. Additionally, the article notes that overhangs can assist to mitigate any downdraft along the building facade. So Nick or Brian, can you confirm for us how this feature is being implemented on the site?
Yeah, we have multiple locations where on level 8 we have a projection from the building to mitigate the downdraft. We also have canopies along both street frontages that create protection, both again from the wind downdraft and from water as well. The canopies, again, you can see, I'm sorry, the large one I mentioned on the upper levels here across the top would be approximately a 3.5-foot projection. That will create a level of break as well as a little bit closer view there. And then down on the lower levels, leasing area, entry drives, we're looking at incorporating aluminum canopies there as well. Again, that helps with the wind mitigation. Okay. The third would be sort of the articulations and cutouts within the building that provide relief from the face of the facade. The primary one being on the upper right side on the Hargett Street, where we were looking at a 90-foot deep, 73-foot 3-inch step back through the building along the stairwell. You see here we're proposing another 3-foot step back, another 3-foot step back at the other stairwell. And then on the street level, we have a series of cutouts here represented on both ends by the drive entrances that provide relief from the facade. And then finally on the corner, as you've seen in the renderings so far, we have a significant series of cutouts on the corner of Boylan and Hargett Street. One on the primary facade of Boylan, broken by a stair tower, and then a secondary cutout that sits right behind the stair tower. On the lower levels, we are proposing larger planters to activate the street frontage, but also provide that break. And just as a comparison, again, I don't want everyone to get too caught up on the comparison, but we do think it's relevant to see what a prescriptive building box would look like without those corner cutouts. So I think that we're trying to make an effort to match the intent of the ordinance. Okay. You want to talk about this?
So just to zoom out for a moment, so we've covered those first two intents of the building massing standards. And so just sort of big picture, we have a required 3,800 square feet of step back under the code. There is 6,045 square feet of step back being provided once the setback is included. So depending on the purpose of this, and there are multiple purposes, just for overall scale comparison, just want to provide that additional background. So the third intent of the building massing standards is to provide a consistent street wall. And I do want to introduce this slide because, as you know, that surrounding that gray building you see here, that represents the Block 83 project that was approved. And so the box you see here, that represents what can be built under existing zoning today. It also does reflect the design alternate that was previously granted. It has expired, but that is our best guess today as far as what could or would be built here based on recent approvals that were granted on this site. So with that, we want to, one moment. Oh, we also have a rendering of that approved building. Again, showing the lack of step back. That's just sort of a screen there in the front. And that's consistent with many, if not most, of our newer downtown towers. So again, based on these are all fairly recently approved buildings, as well as the approval that was previously granted for Block 83. So this design represents our best guess for what would result in a consistent street wall. It would be hard to say otherwise given what we see being built in the downtown area and what was approved immediately next door on this block. So back to, this is again the shadow study, but showing you that massing again. And this slide illustrates the mismatch that would occur. So if a step back were provided on this site and the adjacent building were constructed as previously proposed and approved, that sort of leaves our residential tenants there in the corner blocked by the adjoining office tower. So really doing our best to match that. And we showed this slide the last time we were here, and I'll just note that this language that's outlined in blue, this just confirms that that design alternate was granted, eliminating the need for a step back at Block 83 right next door. The fourth intent of the building massing standards is to visually reduce the perceived scale of the building. So there are a number of design elements that achieve that here on this site. This slide, although I understand it's very difficult to read, will show you others, but it does highlight the number of features that do have that effect here. And to just flip back a few slides, this just highlights how that standard has been met in other locations. So when we're looking at the need to visually reduce the perceived scale of the building, I don't know that there's been another example that has as many features achieving that goal as are proposed here. So by contrast, this proposal represents a more intricate style, using contrasting materials and other design elements in order to reduce that perceived scale. So in that, like I said, there are so many they can be difficult to pick out on this slide, and here we've shown both facades have that. So with that, I will leave it to Nick to walk us through in the more easily viewed rendering here, so you can pick out the elements a little bit better. Nick, can you walk us through the different elements that contribute to the reduction of the perceived scale of this building?
Absolutely, happy to. Probably the best place to start is at the base of the building. When we wanted to create a very, very active street environment, we wanted to focus on the base of the building. And this building of this scale almost requires sort of a language that requires two bases. One larger portion that includes the first 8 floors, but also the first 2 floors, where we're proposing a larger format masonry and then transitioning as we're working our way up the building to another smaller format, traditional brick masonry in a modular form, and then breaking the building midway on level 8 to create a visual break before we get to the top of the building, where we're transitioning to more glass, more transparency, and alternate materials. And this is it in more of a diagrammatic form, what you see represented as in the light blue. Yep. Okay.
So far we've covered those 4 different intents of the building massing standards. Those all go to standard number 1. There are 5. I promise they'll pick up. They don't all have 4 subparts to them. So the second standard related to building massing is that the base is distinguishable from the building above, and that it enhances the pedestrian environment through changes in material, fenestration, ornamentation, rhythm, or other sculpting of the base. So again, this standard is really just about making sure, A, the base stands out, and B, the pedestrian environment is enhanced. So again, I'd like to call Nick Barnes to describe for us how the building's design elements will achieve those two goals.
Okay. Again, some of this is sort of a recap in diagrammatic format of the masonry type 1 along the base. What you see represented in yellow, it would be glass. The red color would be a masonry 2. Again, the smaller format. Again, taking on a very traditional form for building architecture, including some other textured elements, a fiber cement, as well as we are looking to integrate a green wall at the corner of Boylan and Hargett, which we discussed at the last meeting. Trying to figure out logistically how to get that to work along that southern facade, but I think we have some good plans there. As we get to the top of the building, this lower portion here, we're transitioning to another fiber cement texture, painted darker color, again to delineate these first 8 floors as a base. On the Hargett Street elevation, again, the same logic applies. We're wrapping the corner with the larger format masonry on the lower levels, introducing the masonry type 2 along the screening of the parking deck, and carrying the same rhythm from Boylan Street around that corner, again, to really manage the scale and try to do it in a way that fits in with the neighborhood. Same usage of materials, same organizing logic. What you see represented in the lower portion hatched would technically be the basement level, although it does have some level of frontage and activation along the street. Just wanted to be clear that we are calculating that as a basement level. Again, going back to the overall rendering, that's a little bit easier to read than the colored graphics. Do you have anything else? Okay. So this is lighting, right? Okay. Again, going back to the lighting strategy and trying to draw attention to the organization and the rhythm of the facade, trying to find equal base sizes, again, to create a facade that feels like it has a level of permanence to it, and also a strong base. The storefronts along the pedestrian way are set back to create a deeper shadow line. We've included canopies at all the exits, trying to create, again, cover. The balcony railings, we're looking to recess into the building facade, again, to create shadow and interest. As we're working through the masonry detailing, we're looking at a very traditional detail, again, representative of the neighborhood and the surrounding architecture, with stone caps and, again, just traditional masonry detail. Okay. Same thing coming around here on Hargett Street. The same logic applies to the lighting and the ornamentation and the detail of the masonry. Okay, here's the vertical rhythm, again, more in a graphic standard as to what I was talking to before. Finding dimensional rhythm to repeat, it creates a balanced facade. Again, finding that what we represent as an A or a B rhythm being repetitive across the facade, we're trying to repeat that on the parking deck as well, but bringing in an alternate rhythm at the base to create a heavier base that can carry the weight of everything above it. Okay. There are some comments about the sculpting of the base and trying to create again, the depth of the facade within the materials that we have, and finding a way to create shadow line within the facade by recessing storefronts, recessing windows, and changing materials. We are articulating some of the depth that we're trying to achieve along both the Boylan Street and the Hargett Street facades. Again, here's more of the sculpting of the base along where we're carving out at the corner of Boylan and Hargett Street. And as you can see, a little bit beyond, apologize, there is a tree right there. Worth noting that we are carving out as well to create an elevated patio area for a potential food and beverage user.
Okay, so we've heard a bit about standard number 2, how the base is being distinguished from the rest of the building and enhancing that pedestrian environment through changes in material, fenestration, ornamentation, rhythm, and sculpting of the base. So we'll move on to standard number 3, which is that this is the oddball standard, the conditional standard, where if the alternate proposes a building setback in lieu of step back, then the resulting open space includes pedestrian amenities, which may include seating, trees, landscaping, and outdoor dining. So here, where we feel that the reduction in step back is somewhat partly offset by the additional setback, we wanted to go ahead and go through the elements that we do find within that setback as well. There are a number of them, and I invite Brian, can you go through those for us?
Yeah, so looking at this from a little bit more of an urban planning perspective, if we're going to move the building back 3 feet, what are we going to do with that space to activate it and to make it feel a little better? Apologize in advance. A lot of this is going to sound like things we've talked about before, but articulating the building, having deeper punches for the windows, having a change in scale in the masonry as you go up the building, introducing a more mature landscaping than what is required, changing out for green walls and different textures on the elevation we think is important, as well as some of the other things, the planters, kind of additional planters than what would be normally required. So it's looking at the ground plane between the curb and the building face. And then, as Nick pointed out, it's the first 2 floors that we're really paying a lot of attention to, and then as well the next 8.
And can you walk us through which of the amenities will be found within the actual 3-foot setback area?
Nick, can you do that?
The amenities within that 3-foot step back, we're looking at including a series of tables and chairs, umbrellas, planters, to really activate that street frontage. And going back to the planters that Brian mentioned earlier, again, trying to add a lot of color interest to that lower level. Looking at the prior image, sorry, I'm going to go off script here for a second. Again, seeing how that works at the corner here, where we're carving away the building, incorporating planters, incorporating the larger caliper trees. All of these are, because we are doing the extra 3 feet, we're allowed to increase the size of those trees again and the pedestrian environment.
So to pick out the things I think that we heard within that setback area, we saw the planters. You can sort of see behind the tree there that the sconces are there as well, the seating, the additional shade, and there are some planters also within that setback, not only the ones out in the right-of-way as well. So with that, we'll move on to standard number 4, which is that the building uses other architectural treatments to mitigate wind impacts, increase light, and visually reduce the scale of the building. You may have heard those words before earlier today. So like I said, feel free to ask us to move on. Some of this is familiar, but to get started, it asks about mitigating wind impacts. So in an abbreviated form, we've already heard some of this, so I can go through this pretty quickly. So this slide is actually about reducing the wind acceleration around the corners. So that corner cutout makes a big difference at the corner itself compared with the UDO requirement, which could have a very sharp corner at that location. And here you see that contrast. Oops. Here we go. The next piece of this is to increase light. Again, we've covered this today. We've heard testimony on this point, so it's just a reminder. The proposed sconce lighting will increase light along Boylan at the pedestrian level, as well as along the entire building base. And the same is true on Hargett Street. Again, those sconces are a little bit hidden here in the rendering, but you do see the building being lit up on this side as well. And with respect to visually reducing the building scale, again, you've seen these previously, so we actually squished them onto one slide that's even harder to read. And here, the elements that we've already heard today include the contrasting materials, the varied glazing rhythm, including that glass corner that you see there, the horizontal features, such as the canopies and the masonry, articulation with the building cutouts. There's a section of balconies providing a change in texture to the building, as well as the step back on Hargett Street. And the fifth standard for the building massing standards is that the building does not cause undue shadow impacts on public spaces, amenity areas, or on surrounding streets. So we have, again, discussed the standard in some detail previously today as well as last month. So here I simply bring up this image again to remind the Commission of the minor impact of this request on shadows overall, as well as its positive impact along that Boylan Avenue sidewalk that you saw in detail. And again, no shadow impacts on Hargett Street, as you saw previously. So in general, again, I'd like to step back a bit on this one. The impacts of the internal building services on the Boylan Avenue residences between the parking deck and the right-of-way were a key point at our last meeting. So we want to talk a little bit about that. We had a particular question about why that step back would disrupt the intent to provide those internal services to the building. And here, I would like to invite Nick or Brian back up to walk us through what happens if we have that step back at the upper levels, what happens in the garage level to make this change and to really take away the ability to have those residences on the Boylan side screening the parking deck.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. I know this was, again, a question that was asked at the last meeting, and we wanted to go back and just clarify that, when we started the design process, we were fully aware of the intent of the UDO. And one of the things that we have here is it's a dimensional hardship. And trying to do the right thing and to create a building that is suited for this specific site, the specific size and specific use. There's some things that we needed to do from a building organization standpoint that forced us to take what we call core elements, so your elevators, your stairs, and that's one of the first things that you have to place because it has to go all the way through the building for continuity. What you'll see on the screen is a diagram. What we tried to do is talk about first at the basement level, the core element on the bottom right-hand side. This is, as Molly was talking about, is having the building function inside in lieu of outside the building, where we would be faced with some unfortunate roll-up doors and things along those lines. So having these core services land outside the parking area allowed us to free up the lower level to allow these trash services, move-in services to happen within the building, which is a tremendous challenge on a postage stamp size site. Talk about that.
Can you point out for us where the building core falls in the basement?
It is highlighted in red over here, the existing core, and there's also another stair down here on the bottom.
Thank you. And so if the facade were stepped back, especially on the Boylan side, can can you show us on the bottom left there? I think that's the right level that shows us where does the building core have to go and why?
So one of the things that we talked about with the owner from the very beginning, again, is having a very activated first 8 levels of this building. What you see represented on the left-hand side, on the lower left, is a parking area over here to the right, a corridor, and very, very shallow residential units. And we call those liner units. And those liner units allow us to put residential screening across the first 8 levels to screen the parking. And with that, from a firefighting access code requirement, as well as ease of move in, move out, daily function, those core elements need to be outside of the vehicular travel path on a typical floor. So they're required to be outside of the parking.
Right. So we've heard a couple of impacts of that. We heard from Nick that would, if we were not able to, if the building core had to move to the interior, we lost the outside units for the screening. We would also have to have building services on the street, so looking more like some of the recent buildings that we've seen downtown. And so this is the building that is proposed with those liner units that we heard about. And then without the design alternate with respect to the step back, we would instead have to continue the parking deck to the frontage to get the dimensions that are needed interior to that garage. Anything to add? Was that?
No, that's correct. I mean, we're already pretty tight on the parking to squeeze parking corridor and residential units onto this site. It's very, very tight. So Molly's correct. The alternate would be that the entire floor would need to become parking and a centralized core would be used.
Okay, so that took us through our longest one, I promise. That was all about the building massing and about the step back requirement. We've walked through each of the 5 standards for that design alternate. We also heard that, that you wanted to hear some additional detail about the transparency request, as well as the request to use louvers to screen the parking deck. So we'll go through those. Those thankfully have fewer standards, particularly transparency. Move back to here. So this is the second of our 3 open requests. This one only has 2 standards to be met. And here those standards are to provide visual interest along the street-facing facade. And we'll start there. We'll also discuss the second standard, which is to minimize the blank wall area. So Nick, can you walk us through, this is sort of a now familiar image to us, what are the items that you feel provide the visual interest along the street-facing facade?
Along the street facade, again, we're trying to think about as a layered environment. Let me first start with the building with the taller storefront, clear transparency glass, the wall sconces that begin to layer in light, and then there's an opportunity again with our 3-foot step back to create a outdoor dining opportunity and outdoor seating, perhaps benches, some shaded areas for people to sit. There's any number of activities that people do along the street. They go outside, they take a phone call, they go outside, they grab a meal, and that's what we wanted to try to create here. Here's a little bit closer view, again, of creating a series of planters with flowers and grasses and things that will change throughout time. And then we've also got deeper canopy pieces here as well, providing shade and shadow, and then, of course, exterior lighting. A recap here of the corner elevation and the outdoor dining. Again, really think about creating an active space here as well. Here's a larger elevation of that. Again, down here at the street level, activated uses, umbrellas, tables, chairs.
What would happen to this facade if we did attempt to meet the transparency requirements on that ground story?
I think we would lose a lot of the rhythm that we've established regarding the rhythm of the base. Again, there's always an opportunity to just do glass and trying to fight that urge to just put a bunch of storefront glass in. So we tried to really create a rhythm that made sense with the architecture and has a bit of the historic feel to it.
I'll just quickly finish these up because we've got, on the Hargett side, there's obviously the public art and the planters as well, and some of the same repeated features. Just to zoom in on some of those, the green wall, of course, which you have seen previously. The building cutout and the outdoor dining. It's also worth noting that the eastern end of the Hargett Street facade will contain an active use at the level of the exposed basement. So there at the bottom right, you see this additional transparent area. That is considered part of the basement, and there is not a transparency standard for the basement. So although that is what pedestrians will experience, it does not count toward the ground story transparency requirement, which starts above that. I understand that's, what was the height of that above the sidewalk at that point?
13 feet.
Great. So the transparency standard there doesn't even kick in until 13 feet above the sidewalk at that location. So now we're turning to the second intent of the transparency requirements, which is to minimize the blank wall areas. And they've been minimized for the building as a whole using several architectural elements here. We just went back to the material exhibit so that you can see the different types of materials that help to break up those otherwise blank walls. And other features are easier to see in the rendering. I think here you get the more complete picture of how those blank wall areas are broken up. Those are similar to the same features that reduce the visual scale of the building. So you have heard those from Nick and Brian previously. As we heard, the only way to increase transparency at the ground level would be to create that solid glass storefront to remove the pilasters that help to break up those facades. It's worth noting that we have not made a request for a design alternate for the blank wall requirements, and that's because the largest blank wall areas are compliant with the code, and you see the examples here called out of where those largest blank wall areas are. Those do not require design alternates. So the second standard for transparency is that the request utilizes other architectural, artistic, or landscape treatments to create visual interest to offset the reduction in transparency. Because I know you've heard these a few times, Nick, can you take us very quickly through those features? You just rattle those off.
Absolutely. So we're trying to utilize a handful of strategies. Changes in the building materials, fenestration and rhythm, canopies, pilasters, planters, outdoor dining, the building cutouts, the green wall, public art, and additional transparency provided at the sidewalk level, which is, again, technically below ground floor. On the Boylan side, again, we have the changes in the materials and fenestration, canopies that are a little tough to read here. I just want to make sure everybody gets a good look at what the intent is there. Again, planters, seating, shade, building cutouts.
We can now move to our final request, which is to use louvers to screen the parking deck. And the first standard, there are 4 standards for this request. The first standard is that the request is consistent with the intent of the screening requirements. The intent of the screening requirements are to provide effective visual screening and to maintain safe vehicular and pedestrian circulation. With respect to providing effective visual screening, louvers are specifically mentioned in the UDO as being one of the materials that may be used subject to the granting of a design alternate. And so we'll go through those standards. So on this slide, you see the comparison between the permitted perforated panels on the left side of the screen and the requested louvers on the right. I know this one, I believe our colors get washed out in this room, so they're a little hard to see what that light is doing. So Nick, can you walk us through how the escaping light is different in these two situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about a louvered screening, we are looking at something that aesthetically looks aligned to something we have here. That is something we did not have in the last meeting to help kind of bridge that gap, where we're looking at louvers that, again, are a tighter spacing and that they will mitigate the passage of light. Headlights are a major concern when it comes to screening for light spillage outside of a parking deck. So the way that those louvers are angled will help mitigate some of that.
Thank you. And Nick, if you could stay up here, I think when we discussed it, I think I understood it. If you can see this well enough, you can see kind of the light coming straight out of those perforated panels. Yes. How is that different with the louvers?
Again, it's the percentage opening. If there's a larger opening that is allowed, again, if you have a perforated panel, and that's at, say, 90 degrees, it's got perforations in it that allow that light to pass through, whereas a louver is angled down and keeps the passage of light through those openings.
Thank you. So it sounds like it's more of a reflected light
It is.
for the most part rather than direct. Okay. And so for general reference, what you see on your screen is a commercially available perforated panel with a 40% open area that is compliant with UDO requirements. So this is an example of where that light would be emitted directly through that panel. The second intent of the screening materials requirement is to maintain safe vehicular and pedestrian circulation. Nick, what can you tell us about any impact of this request?
Here, I mean, the material change is pretty minor. I don't see any additional hazard.
All right, the second standard for the louver request is that the request can maintain the comfort and safety of pedestrians. This request is limited to the upper stories. Nick, you can stay up here. Right? So do you see any impact on comfort or safety from the pedestrians walking along the street here?
I don't.
Great. The third standard is that other architectural or landscape features are used to create visual interest. We have been through these slides several times, not only last month, but earlier today. I submit that our slides provided and submitted to the record, slides 66 through 77, as previously explained, cover this standard. Happy to go back through them if you prefer. Seeing no interest, I'll move on to standard number 4, which is that the requested alternate is better than or equal to the standard. So Nick, what can you tell us about the difference between the louvers and the permitted perforated panels?
As you've heard previously, the proposed louvers will provide improved light blockage over the permitted perforated panels. They also reduce visibility of objects inside the deck without impacting the vehicular and pedestrian comfort or safety. The overall proposed building is designed to maximize visual interest while using aesthetically pleasing features with the pedestrians in mind.
So with that, we've now revisited the 3 requests that were made last time in which we heard additional information was wanted. We've made an attempt to provide information on each of the standards for each of those requests. And for each of those requests and standards, competent, substantial, and material evidence has been provided today. Our team is ready to assist you with any remaining questions you may have.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak in relation to this case?
Adam, I do have a quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
Molly? Sorry, quick follow-up question. When you were talking about the placement of the building anchor, I believe, right, the part on Boylan Avenue that has all of the fire access and why it can't be placed in the center of the building, right? Mm-hmm. Is part of the reason for that location and the importance of it being on Boylan Street to accommodate the significant step back on the southeast corner for the pool landing?
So no. So the factors that push that out to the edge have to do with the parking deck. The amenity level is above the parking deck.
So let's just go ahead and ask any questions that anyone has. Well, Molly's up here. Take a minute to get clarity on anything else. I don't think there's anyone from the public, so we can just go ahead and do that.
I've got a question. First, I applaud you guys for putting those services for the building inside the parking deck. I don't think we see that enough in Raleigh. Can you explain again the alignment where this project abuts to the project to the north, both at the ground level and the upper levels?
Sure. One moment. Let me get to the slide. Just want to get to the right image here. Okay. I think Nick is probably best suited to answer this question.
Absolutely. A lot of the building planning came after we understood what was approved next door, and to try to do something in response to create a cohesive block. Fully acknowledge that in the current economic environment, an office building of that size is probably not likely, but something of a similar size and shape will likely be built there at some point. But what we're responding to is again the larger mass of what was an office building that has a higher floor to floor than a residential building, as well as we're responding on the east side, looking towards town, of the 7-story parking deck that would basically envelop our site. So we would have 2 rather large concrete walls on 2 sides of our site. If anybody in this group recalls, we did look at this in another format of a 8-story building. However, having this scale around us sort of required us to match. Again, just because of the scale of the neighborhood and what was going to be built.
Yeah, and I guess just to clarify my question, it's more about like the plane in which those 2 projects abut each
on
other?
the frontage?
Yeah,
Right, yeah. So
right.
we have a very similar street section along Boylan, obviously, when you take in property lines, easements, and everything else. So that alignment would be there. We are looking at 3 feet, again, the setback, but it's a negligible difference from the adjacent building. And I can't say with certainty where exactly the adjacent building is in their site plan to give you a dimensional, but the idea is that we are creating a cohesive block. So we are responding to, in a lot of ways, what the development is adjacent. On Hargett Street, again, the approved allows building up to the property line, which limits the uses that we can put along the property line adjacent to Hargett Street, and that is why parking is located where it is in the overall site plan. I'm not sure if I've
Yeah, I think so.
articulated.
And the reason I ask, I know Molly referenced that other case for that project to the north, and I was just trying to confirm, because I think I looked back at the materials for that case, and I think at that corner where it abuts your property, that other project is set back off the property line by about 20 feet.
There's a portion, it comes up, and then it steps back at a higher level, but
Yeah, this is at the ground floor.
it does both.
At the ground floor, it's set back off the property line by about 20 feet.
Is it an access drive?
A little over 20 feet. Now, I don't know if the plans have changed, but I think that's part of what got approved as part of that case.
Yeah, not being able to respond to, I'll let Molly.
Molly, I don't know if you know.
I understand that approval has actually expired. So at this point, we're looking at what is permitted under zoning.
Gotcha, thank you. And then just rolling on with questions. The tables and chairs that you show in the renderings, are those allowed currently to be placed within the right-of-way? Is the city allowing that right now?
That's our understanding, is it's movable furniture, that if right-of-way easements, that can be placed there.
Okay.
I have one clarification about the caliper of tree that you suggested, increasing the caliper of the street trees from 2 inches to 4 inches caliper. City of Raleigh's requirement for street trees is 3-inch caliper. So if you're increasing them, you'd be increasing them from 3-inch to 4-inch. The plans show 3-inch.
That's correct. Sorry, I misspoke on that. Yeah.
Okay. So you intend to increase them over 3 inches?
Yes, to again, for windbreak, shade, and shadow. Coming in with a larger tree sort of day one felt like the right thing to
And
do.
is that intended to be represented in these plans that you submitted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the plans that we're looking at do show 3-inch caliper, so if we were gonna require something larger, we'd need to make a condition.
Yeah.
So we were offering the 4 inches as a potential condition for the approval.
Okay. Got it.
And then I think you told us last time, but can you reiterate what the function is of that corner, the corner of Hargett and Boylan, where it's cut out? Like, what's going to happen in that cutout space?
Again, right now we're establishing as a mixed use project. So I think the idea the owner is envisioning is that there would be a food and beverage user of sort, an active user there that would activate that space.
Okay, so it'll probably be leased to a tenant of the building to be used as dining, seating, or something of that sort.
Yeah, just as any other sort of retail frontage would have.
Thanks.
Any other questions from commissioners?
I had one question about the residential units along Boylan Heights, or along Boylan that you highlighted. Those are on floors 8 and below, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so they would not be affected by the requirement of stepping back the building from floors 13 and above. Is that also correct?
So it's all sort of linked with the vertical core that we're talking about and having those units. So they're a very shallow residential unit, roughly 18 to 20 feet along that facade, whereas you get to a typical residential unit being 30 to 33 feet in depth. Yeah, we can.
So it's mainly that stair and elevator core that has to also serve those residential units.
Yeah, and worth maybe noting a little bit, typical two-bay parking deck, roughly 120 to 122 feet. As you can see, we're already carving away a portion of that and having partially loaded parking. So again, really trying to get these residential units at the lower levels for an activated facade has been a primary driver and largely why we're in front of you guys today. Is again trying to create that lower level activation, and it, the owner is actually taking a little bit of a hit on efficiencies to do so because he feels it's the right thing to do versus just putting a residential tower on top of a parking deck. That answer your question? Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments, questions? Hearing no additional questions, the commission will now close the hearing and bring the matter to the table. Anyone want to get started? I guess I'd say they clearly did a thorough job of coming back with information for the 3 questions that we asked for more information on. So that checks the boxes. I feel like they kind of threw the kitchen sink at the streetscape. And, and that checks the boxes for intent of these design adjustments. I wonder if that's something that would actually end up being out there on the street, and if we would want that in some of those cases. I don't know what you all think about the number of planters out there, and what that would mean.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate the level of detail heard, and there's a wealth of information, and then the plans obviously are updated to reflect. And last time there was a tree in the parking deck entrance, that type of stuff. So I appreciate all of that.
Specifically on the planter boxes, I don't know that I would feel good about requiring that. I'd maybe leave that part out, but overall, I think the other design adjustments are good.
Mm-hmm. Just from a landscape perspective, I think it's been pretty well shown that increased caliper of trees doesn't really do well over time. Like a 6-inch caliper tree put in a streetscape actually ends up being smaller in 10 or 15 years than a 3-inch caliper tree, because they kind of become zombies for a few years because they lose more of their roots in the movement. So I personally don't have I don't see the value in increasing the caliper of trees unless there's an immediate effect, which I think isn't relevant to what we were trying to get out of this, which was the wind mitigation in the future when we have a lot more big buildings around, which probably isn't going to happen for a few years. So personally, I think they could just leave them the way it is on the plans.
I think to the question of the planters that were shown, I think the assortment of planters going down Hargett Street, I would certainly not require those. They kind of feel like an afterthought.
I don't know that they'll work on that slope.
And that
Like trash.
Pick up and carry away with you.
and that side of the building does have the step back because it has the amenity deck. Mm-hmm. And I know there's been plenty of cases where we've looked at projects, and if there's a portion of the facade that has that setback or step back, we, particularly when it's deeper than it needs to be, we wouldn't require a step back along that whole facade. So I'm less concerned about the Hargett Street side. So then to me, it comes down to a question of Boylan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of the planters that were shown on Boylan, I prefer the more permanent looking ones, like the wooden ones that they had along the street. I do worry about them being maintained over time, but you would think in order to keep residents happy and be a good neighbor that they would maintain those.
Yeah, I'll just add that planters on a south-facing streetscape are really, even if you're going to run irrigation on timers out there, they just struggle. They have low soil volume. They are nearly going to certainly not look good, and so I'll just add that to the Hargett side. I totally agree. And Catherine, could you help clarify? There's a bunch of stuff on the ASR plan set that aren't in the renderings, like the tables and the planters and the green wall, I think, and the art facade. Are those things that if we want, we need to, if we want to make sure that they actually happen, we need to condition them, even though the materials are submitted?
And the reverse also of if there's elements that we don't want, do we need to condition that?
So you're considering what they have proposed to you. So you're considering it with all of that, the tables and the green wall and all that kind of stuff. So if they are proposing to include it as part of their application, then if it is approved with that in there, they will be held to that. If there are certain things that they can amend their application to remove something, And then, but again, then whatever's left is something, if it's still included as what you consider would be required to go forward. If there is something that you specifically want to have as a condition that is required amendment to what they have now, or it doesn't sound like the applicant has fully offered the 4-inch caliber trees. I think I heard Ms. Stewart say that it was something they'd offer as a condition, so that might not be something that's already packaged up with what you're looking at. So if you wanted that, you'd make that as a condition. But anything else, I'd say if it's part of the application that they presented to you as what's going to be on the ground and included as part of their project, then they would be held to it unless.
So all of those planters as shown on this rendering?
Yeah, and you might want to ask the applicant what their thoughts are on that too. I don't know how much of that is potentially there to meet other UDO requirements, if any. So I don't know if they serve other purposes as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that.
And I'll just say, I think I personally would be for just removing them entirely from these plans, since that's a different process in office, and then there's more flexibility when they get to that point. Do them if they can do them, but I don't want to create a conflict if that's not possible when they get to that point.
When you asked the question about furniture, does the city allow that many things on the sidewalk of any kind? I mean,
It's handled through a PUPS permit, and it's just a different later stage process.
And maybe
Public use of public space, sorry.
defer to Casey to the extent she might know that answer. I know sometimes there's things within the streetscape that are required elements, and then there's some things that might fall under an encroachment perhaps process. I'm not really sure. I would defer to Casey to see if she might know.
Casey, you want to come up and speak to that?
I'm not particularly familiar with the permitting requirements to use the public space, like the PUPS permits that you guys are talking about. That's not within my purview. There are certain streetscape elements, like street trees, that are required, right? And then to the extent that there's any like outdoor dining or other tables, chairs, et cetera, that are proposed within the streetscape that aren't explicitly required, that would typically have to go through the permitting process with the appropriate entities at the city to allow those fixtures in the right of way.
It's generally a fixed, they're going to go through an encroachment process, and the movable stuff can go through PUPs to an extent, through that, which is handled by the Special Events and Hospitality Office.
so, I mean, it may not even be appropriate to consider those as a possible alternative to other things that aren't being complied with, right? If we don't even know if they can happen.
Yeah, yeah. Could I think I'd like to open up the case for Molly to speak to this, just to the intent of these and to how much you know that this is exactly what you want, or if this is like an idea of, we want to put planters here because we feel like we need to have them based on what you said, or something like that.
Yeah, so it is the intent. I think we've specifically talked about street trees as a condition, for example, and in fact, we can offer a certain amount of planters as well, both combined within the right of way and within our setback. Now, I'm not sure which features you're referring to, but within our 3-foot setback, we can certainly, without any sort of approval, have benches, planters, all sorts of things in there. And I understand at most, depending on what the object is, there is a minor encroachment agreement with the city.
Yeah, so most of those planters that were really close to the building were within that.
Absolutely.
So the things that aren't are the tables and the planters that
Right.
were out further out on the streetscape.
Right.
Is that correct?
I like the planters that are in their 3-foot setback, so I'd be comfortable if we want to split hairs there.
On the Hargett side?
Yeah. No, the
No,
Boylan
on the
side.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we can, I would propose that they've presented sufficient material for all of these. My biggest concern is the planters on the Hargett side. And if it sounds like it is resonating with other people, I would just I don't know if we need to make a condition, but I would be happy for those not to be there, or for them to try to not put those there.
I would remove the planters in what we're approving within the public, the ones that are within the public realm, just as a I think maybe a little bit cleaner, more flexible solution.
Yeah, I think of all the requests, the only one that I keep focusing back on is the step back. But if I look at the building massing standards, which are to provide access to light and air at the street level, mitigate the wind impacts, provide a consistent street wall, and visually reduce the perceived scale of the building, and then the findings for a design alternate include the alternate uses architectural base distinguishable from the building above that enhances the pedestrian environment through a change in material, fenestration, ornamentation, rhythm, or other sculpting of the base. Whether you agree with the architecture or not, I think it does that. The next one is if the approved alternate proposes a building setback, and I don't think they are proposing a building setback to be part of this. The building uses other architectural treatments to mitigate wind impacts, increase light at pedestrian level, and visually reduce the scale of the building. Again, similar to the last comment, I would think that it does that. And then the building does not cause undue shadow impact on public spaces, amenity areas, and surrounding streets, and I think it does that as well.
Yeah. I'd agree.
I mean, I would think if we're going to say that we are going to require setback in lieu of step back, it would require a text change to number 3, where it says if the approved alternate proposes a building setback in lieu of the step back, then you have to do X, Y, and Z.
I think we got into that circular conversation last time.
Yeah.
About it being there, but not being offered as an alternative.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
If they're not calling it a step back, then
Yeah.
that doesn't, we don't get to look at those.
Yeah. I mean, I think every other project that I've seen that I've been part of, if they didn't have the step back, they offered something, whether it was more of a setback off the street, more pedestrian amenities. Maybe it wasn't a full step back, but it was at least an attempt at a step back, some folded planes, doing more on one side of the site than the other side. I think they tried a little harder. But in this case, I don't know that I can find anything that would say it doesn't meet these findings. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, I have some ongoing angst over how much of this is caused by placing a pool landing on the southeast instead of the southwest corner of the building, and having the public essentially absorb the cost of accommodating that design choice that will benefit the residents and not the public. That is honestly my biggest hang-up with the building massing piece of this. But
Yeah. I think that's a good point.
I think there were a couple questions last time about the overhang element, and that's contributions to the sense of the pedestrian experience of that being overhead. I think personally, I'm here with this project of being willing to move forward, but I just want to raise it since that came up last time. If there are any thoughts or questions about that.
You're talking about that little 3.5-foot overhang piece? Because I think they've got that overhang at the entry points. I saw it a couple places down on the ground level, right?
yeah, there were two kind of categories of overhangs. There's the 8th story.
I'm talking about the
3.5
8th story
foot, and then
one.
there was the ground level
Yeah,
over entrances and exits.
yeah. I mean, personally, I think 8 stories up 3.5 feet is not really going to do much to your perception. I think the renderings make it look a little deeper than it's actually going to be, to be honest.
3.5 feet out, up 8 stories, you won't notice.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Anyone want to make a motion? Conditions?
Solely on the building massing request, or are we going through all of them?
We can do it any way. We will need to approve all of them or condition.
I think my only thing is just somehow conditioning to not require the planters that are in the public, within the public right of way.
Yeah. So I didn't mind the planters on South Boylan. The ones that kind of got me were the ones on Hargett, because they're on a slope and there's a bunch of them, and those are actually not in the right of way. So, I mean,
And so the planters are not shown on the plan,
They're not on-
as far as I can tell.
they're not on the plan. None of the planters or tables or anything are on the
So I
plans.
think all of those were offered up as something they'd be willing to do if we wanted to put a condition on it. So since they're not in the plans, I don't know that we need.
So that's not what Catherine said.
Well, let's maybe ask the applicant for clarification on that, because I thought maybe they were on the plans, but they're just
they're
on the
not on
power.
the plans,
Okay, well, let's
just
ask
on the
them for
rendering, yeah.
clarification on that then.
Yeah. I think they were, Molly, I think those are just up for conditioning, right? All the
Correct,
tables and
correct.
plants and- yeah.
You heard earlier that, that it is possible to offer a condition for a certain minimum square footage of planters, for example.
Yeah.
But you're right, not on the plans today.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So given that, are there other pieces that we, not necessarily the planters, but like the art on the,
Yeah, on the screening wall.
yeah, are there other elements beyond the planters that we
'Cause
do
all of
want
those-
to now put forward as a,
Not me.
So, yeah, just to be clear, like all the renderings of the tables and planters and chairs, there's no requirement for any of that to happen. It's just aspirational.
has the design changed?
Nothing in the design changed, I don't think. It was just more information.
Just so I'm clear, with the lighting was on the original plan? And
The illustration of it was not, and so it was greater detail was offered today, and then the actual highlighting of it in the presentation.
yeah, you might want to get confirmation too that the lighting is something that's included regardless, right? That was my understanding, but
Yeah, let's see.
It's in here.
I don't think we've got a plan of that. Molly, I don't see it on the plans.
I get planters on that. And I guess to be clear, help us understand which elements of what was presented to us are not in the plans, but would be
Sure.
potentially.
I'll invite Nick Barnes back up on these points. So with respect to the lighting, I know that we provided additional detail this time. It was shown last time. Is that something that is currently binding on the plans, or can we offer it as a condition?
It can be offered as a condition as it's designed. You know, the idea is that we are articulating a lighting plan, and that would highlight the architecture and the rhythm that we've discussed to date. So, you know, the lighting design it's a very detailed thing to do well, and at this point we're conceptualizing what we would attempt on the elevation.
Yeah, it's kind of makes sense.
Is there anything else was part of the presentation that we haven't covered beyond the planners, the art, and the lighting? Just so we're fully clear.
Tables, planters.
Green wall.
So many of the elements that are particularly decorative simply don't show up on an elevation that gets approved. So they're just not to that level of detail. So they are the intent of the project, and I understand Nick has some additional comments on that.
Yeah, we're trying to help paint the picture a little bit. We have an owner that's incredibly engaged and invested in the neighborhood, lives there, works there, is highly focused and has a vision for this that he's had for a lot of years. And we're trying to fill in those gaps right now. And, all these pieces that we talk about, it's the right thing to do. It's a genuine approach that we want to take to the design, that this is, an overall impactful part of the neighborhood, and doing exterior lighting, finding the right wall sconce, the right scale, the right color temperature. All those things are what we would spend a lot of time on in design. And admittedly, some of the planners are there to help bridge the gap. Besides, because sometimes when you look at a building, just the building, it can feel sterile. And when you begin to add landscape, you begin to add those features, the life, the vision of what we are trying to achieve is what we're trying to express today.
I can also confirm I'm aware that the owner has investigated companies that provide these planters, service these planters, those things. So these are real intents. Also, I think another key visual aspect is those liner apartments, absolutely crucial to the look, and impossible to achieve without that building massing design alternate.
Vicki.
One last piece on that. So when we did look at the massing of the project, we test all different angles and placements and certain things, and there's some building code aspects that require us to put the stair where we do from a firefighting access standpoint and grade, and where they're going to stage vehicles and trucks. And so just wanting the group to know that this was not just a cavalier first response at a building massing, that a lot of thought was given to not only the form of the building, but the life safety and daily function of tenants.
Thank you. All right, I'll close the hearing again. So it looks like we're looking for a motion here, and we can make a motion on each one, or we can make a motion on a whole, on all of the design adjustments as a whole.
Are any of members of the commission, would anyone want the lighting to be one of the proposed conditions that they offered, or are there any other elements that we would like to condition as part of it, or would the commission like to move forward without conditions?
I think that the lighting is a pretty big, has a big impact on how the public interacts with the building, particularly at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's an important component.
And so the condition would be because there are many lights on there, it would really have to be to have a lighting plan that is reflective of what they presented to us. But no less detail than that, I guess.
Okay.
To allow them some authority to kind of change things.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. That'd be fine with me. I think, I can't think of a good condition for the streetscape elements. I kind of feel like it really depends on who leases the space and what kind of activity is happening out there. And these aspirational renderings are assuming a lot of things that they can't really know will happen. So I'd have a hard time. I appreciate hearing the intent of the owner, and would tend to just take them at their word because I can't think of a condition that would be worthwhile.
I agree.
Personally.
I agree.
So I'll make the motion. Catherine, can you help with a condition for the lighting?
Yeah, I have something drafted. It might need some work, but me to go and read you what I have.
Sure.
The project shall include exterior lighting on the South Boylan Avenue and West Hargett Street facades as designed and shown in the applicant's presentation on July 6, 2023.
I think that as shown is too specific. I think we want something more like in accordance with the presentation, maybe.
In the spirit of what we saw in the presentation.
So that might get a little difficult with enforceability,
enforce,
to
yeah.
say, in the spirit of. Can we maybe pull up that slide? One thing we can maybe do is say, as, reflected or shown on the slide, and be more specific about what they're looking at.
Yeah.
You could describe it as a further development of the concept
Oh, yeah.
shared. That might be,
Yeah.
because I think
I like
there's a
that.
lot more detail that goes into that eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So the full,
Is this it, the slide?
this is one of the
The
slides.
Boylan side, and this is the Hargett side. I don't know if you had a different slide.
Molly, do you happen to have a hard copy of either of those slides?
Not at the scale, but we can provide that.
Okay, so maybe we can, somehow we can, well, what number does this come up on your slides?
One moment. Let me get to the number here. While I'm looking
Say
for that.
developed in a manner consistent with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's yeah. You hear that, Catherine?
Yeah.
Developed in a manner consistent with.
Still a little bit,
Yeah.
We'll get something.
I believe this is, let me make sure I'm in the right
Yeah.
version. Yeah, these are the first ones. One moment. While I'm getting there, though, I would just want to caveat it to be subject to staff comment, to reviewer comment, to make sure that we don't get into a corner where something is not approvable.
so can you repeat that one more time? I couldn't hear you.
I would just ask that if any condition be subject to city staff comment, so that we can respond to any comments that they may have during review of this elevation.
You mean as if they say that relevant to some UDO requirement?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, our condition wouldn't supersede UDO requirements regardless, right?
You can't vary, wouldn't be like a variance. They still have to comply with any other UDO requirements in addition to whatever the
Right.
condition is. It can't
Yeah.
replace anything that's also a UDO requirement.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems, yeah. I don't know what the reviewer's comment would be that would you're just
We
just
don't suspect
covering-
there would be one.
Yeah, okay.
So, right, we just don't want to get into a situation where the two things don't overlap.
Do you figure out what slide number that is?
10 and 12. I'm just not able to get there for some reason, but those are the numbers.
Okay, I know you said develop in a manner consistent with, I just said in accordance with, but I'll read you the whole thing and you guys continue to tell me edits. So the project shall include exterior lighting on the South Boylan Avenue and West Target Street facades in accordance with lighting slides 10 and 12 in the applicant's PowerPoint presentation on July 6, 2023, subject to compliance with all other UDO requirements.
And was that related to staff comment as well?
Does that satisfy your staff comment?
Subject.
Saying subject to compliance with all other UDO requirements?
Yes.
So we're good?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
All right, I will move to approve all of the design alternates in front of us for this case with the condition as previously read.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The commission's written decision will be adopted when the minutes of this meeting are adopted, and the written decision will be provided to the applicant and other parties with the right to such notice following the adoption of the decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the purposes of the minutes, do you need the specific commissioners?
Who voted?
Yes.
I think we stated at the beginning, but we can just clarify again, the three alternates that voted were Griffith, Lawson, and Thompson.
That's right.
Correct.
And it was unanimous.
And it was unanimous, yes. Yeah, so we've got, now Jonathan Best is here with us, and so we've got just an update for you, kind of a new piece of information came where when we have more than 9 people, anyone who's non-voting, who's outside of those 9 people, can't participate in the actual deliberation and conversation during the applicant's presentation and hearing.
Matt, you said you needed to leave at 6:45?
6:45,
So,
yeah.
Okay.
so let's tap in, let's swap out, so that way he
Yeah.
doesn't.
So Matt will swap for Jonathan, so you can participate in this next one. That sound good? Okay.
Happy birthday, Matt.
Okay, we will now open evidentiary hearing for item DA 6, 2023, I think. On today's agenda, Casey Evans, will you introduce this? Or is it's DA 7? Is that right? DA 7, 2023.
All right, the subject property is located at 600 South Dawson Street at the northwest corner of South Dawson Street and West Lenoir Street. Excuse me, the southwest corner. The property is zoned downtown mixed use, 20 stories, with the urban limited frontage and conditional use. The applicant is proposing a mixed-use building with commercial and residential uses and structured parking. So this project may seem familiar to some of you. That's because the project applicant previously came before the Appearance Commission with the administrative alternate request to reduce the ground story transparency along Lenoir Street, and that administrative alternate was approved. Since then, the project design has evolved, and the applicant is seeking a new design alternate to further reduce the ground story transparency on the building facade facing West Lenoir Street.
Just to be clear, this is under construction right now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So as we've previously talked about, transparency is required for each side of the building facing a public street, and in this case, a minimum of 66% transparency is required on the ground story, and 50% of that required transparency is required to be located between 3 and 8 feet. And again, as you're very familiar, there's 2 design alternate findings that are required to grant a request for transparency. With that, I'm available for questions, and I will hand it off to the applicant.
Thank you, Casey. The applicant will now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. As a reminder, any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. Introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Commission members. Worth Mills, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 302, Raleigh 27612. Here on behalf of the property owner and applicant, Capital Square Development, I'll go ahead and request that all materials that we have submitted and all presentation slides that we show this evening be formally admitted into the record.
Noted.
And I am joined by Laurent de Cormamon, the architect for the proposed development, and I would like to tender Laurent as an expert witness on this request.
Okay.
And this request, as Casey mentioned, is to reduce the ground floor transparency requirements along West Lenoir Street, which is programmed to house vehicular entrances, move-in entrances, and various other services for the mixed-use project itself. So, as Casey mentioned, again, the site fronts on West Lenoir, South Dawson, and West South Street. Again, we previously were before Appearance Commission for an administrative alternate for the transparency requirements along West Lenoir Street. We also had to seek quasi-judicial relief for building massing, for driveway spacing, intersection spacing, vehicular turnaround movements, and so there was a lot of different requests that went into the original design of this building. Since 2021, our building design has changed slightly with regards to our ground floor transparency along West Lenoir Street. All of the other UDO requirements that we sought relief for and were granted relief to, we are still meeting those, either compliant with the UDO or compliant with the relief that's already been granted. So again, this is a small request in an overall larger development scheme and application and quasi-judicial relief scheme. So this slide shows the site as well as the surrounding uses on either side of the right-of-way. So on the opposite side of West South Street is the City of Raleigh Housing Authority apartments. On the opposite side of South Dawson Street is vacant tract owned by the NC Railroad. And north of our site, across from West Lenoir, is a Duke Power substation. Now, West South Street has seen an increase in pedestrian traffic, both foot traffic and bicycle traffic. South Dawson Street is a main arterial road leading to and from downtown Raleigh. And so we wanted to focus our efforts to enhance the pedestrian experience at the intersection of South Dawson and West South Street. We are exceeding the UDO requirements for ground floor transparency on both of those rights of way. This slide here shows an updated rendering of the mixed-use building, looking at the west-south and South Dawson Street intersection. Along West South Street, we are providing 73% ground floor transparency. This is a rendering looking at focusing more on Dawson Street. Again, with that being a main arterial in and out of downtown Raleigh, we wanted to create an active pedestrian experience along our frontage of this right-of-way, and we are providing 86% ground floor transparency along South Dawson Street. Now I will ask Laurent to step up and go through the mitigation efforts that we're proposing to enhance the pedestrian experience along West Lenore Street.
Good evening. Laurent de Commermont, J. Davis, 510 South Wilmington Street in Raleigh.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you can proceed.
So this is a view of Lenore Street looking west towards the Bowling Heights neighborhood. And as you can see, Lenore Street has a few challenges, one of them being grading along the street. So we have 16 feet of grade change on our side of the street for the project, and then there's also grading going across the way. As you can see, the substation there is much higher than the street, and Harrington Street is much higher. There's some steps connecting to Harrington Street. So on the north side of the street, there's no building, providing an urban frontage or interfacing with pedestrians. It's still a pleasant pedestrian experience with landscaping, and then the Fairweather condos has a landscaping in the lawn. And then on our side of the street, which is on the left side, there's some townhouse projects being completed on top of the street, and then there's a storage facility which abuts our project, which unfortunately doesn't have any active uses at the ground level. So in terms of sidewalk, our sidewalk will be over 20 feet along Lenore Street here, and then we're activating the corner as you saw in the previous previous rendering. But then we also made every attempt to activate the street with active uses. So we did that in 3 locations. The retail along Dawson goes back as far as we could take it. It's about 45 feet. And you can see on the plan at the bottom, what's in yellow is all the services. So we have a large transformer vault, fire control center. We have all the services required for the building. But as you can see, everything that is not used for the services is used as an amenity space to activate the street. So there's the retail at the corner, there's a pet spa next to the transformer vault, and then we're also providing glazing in the stair for the parking garage. In terms of architectural enhancements, we have 3 different precast colors and textures. We have the precast of the parking garage, and then on the building we have 2 different colors and textures. We also have 3 different facade planes, the parking garage, the tower, and then the corner of the tower are all in different planes. And then we have the piers that are extending down from the upper floors that provide vertical breaks to enhance the pedestrian experience. So this is a full elevation on Lenore Street. So we have 32% ground floor transparency, and then between 0 and 12 feet, and between 3 and 8, we have 25% of what's required if we had 66% to begin with. As worth mention, on South Dawson, it's all storefront, and it's retail on either side, and then the amenities in the middle. So we have 86% there. And then on South Street, we also have 70%, as we're putting retail in the parking, at the bottom of the parking garage. And this slide just kind of sums up the uses at the ground floor. And again, all the services are located on Lenore Street. And then we are activating the street with retail, pretty much everywhere that we can, except for driveway entrances and service areas. And the average transparency for all 3 streets is 63% for both the tower and the parking garage. And I think that's it. Oh.
Laurent?
Yes.
Could you help us understand, so we saw this case a year and a half ago.
Yes.
Can you help us understand what the difference in what you're asking for that's different than before, why you're asking for it now that it's under construction. And I mean, I imagine some of this stuff is already built in a way. So can you just address some of those questions and concerns?
Yeah, I think that, when we presented a year and a half ago, I think, we were perhaps overly ambitious in terms of the amount of areas that we could carve out that would not be used for services. As you can see on the left, the transformer vault, as we got farther into the design, we realized we needed 2 transformers and a switch gear, which, is taking up, this huge vault here. And then, all those spaces that I mentioned between the retail and the garage are all spaces that are just required, for the building. It's, loading, trash, fire command center, and fire pump. So I think that a year and a half ago, it was over a year and a half ago, it's the design wasn't, far enough, in terms of all those building services.
And can you address what's the difference from the previous plans? What are we seeing that's different?
The previous plan was 50%, and we're at 32%.
32. And that's mostly happening in both these widths, or are both these yellow widths changed?
Yes, both of them, yes. The retail was going back farther, the pet spa, and, I think, we might have had a bike room there. So essentially, the retail, the corner got smaller, and then the amenities near the transformers got smaller as well.
And I guess this kind of discrepancy didn't get caught later in the review process?
There was an SPR revision that we submitted, and we had several ASR submissions and then several SPR submissions, and we were trying to to find ways to mitigate the transparency issue. For example, the transformer vault, we were trying to find ways to add glazing and such. Obviously it needs to be 3-hour rated, so we're trying to find ways to maintain the glazing, and then it became apparent that we just couldn't get to the 50%.
And it's currently being built as shown here on these plans?
Yes.
Any other questions from the commission?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to resituate myself. I lost myself on my map. Which street is this, are these changes facing?
So this is on Lenore Street.
This is on Lenore Street.
Which is on top of the page.
Okay, thank
which
you.
is this street here, right? Let's see. Yeah. It's, between us and the Duke substation there.
Okay, so across the street from these changes is the Duke substation. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak? Hearing none, does anyone from the commission have any additional questions for the applicant? Hearing no additional questions or presentation of relevant facts, the commission will now close the hearing and bring the matter to the table. I haven't seen a case like this before. Basically, seems like a big whoopsie that it didn't get caught later in the SBRs and the SBR revisions that they weren't meeting what we approved. And now it's I think it's pretty far along. I'm not really sure what we would do. Anybody, I don't, does anybody have any thoughts about this?
Well, I guess I'll start with a question. Do you remember when we saw the project a year and a half ago? Well, I guess Laurent said it was 50% transparent, so it still didn't meet the requirements.
Still didn't meet the requirements.
So it
It's
still
pretty
didn't meet the
close.
requirements, but we approved it, and if I'm remembering our conversation, because there was so much transparency around the rest of the ground floor, to offset this, there's always places around these, small urban sites where you've got to find building services, places for transformers, entries to parking decks, like all of that stuff adds to them not being able to meet the transparency requirements somewhere. And so if Laurent's like any other architect that I've met, you push back on your MEP engineers as much as you possibly can. Get those clearances down for transformers and things like that. So I have to imagine that they push their engineers to get it as tight as they possibly could. And it kind of, to me, I mean, they're still at 63% average around the outside, which is really close to the requirement. And it kind of is what it is as far as everything else going on along Lenore Street. I'm glad that it's facing a substation than something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally don't have an issue with this request.
Yeah, a little concerned about the precedent of, finding something out later and just being like,
Yeah.
maybe should have asked for 32% variance before. Now we need to because it's too late to undo things. I do think that if it had been on, if it had been on the Heritage Park side of things, this would be a very different conversation, but
Yeah.
it is facing a station. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. The commission's written decision will be adopted when the minutes of this meeting are adopted, and the written decision will be provided to the applicant and other parties with the right to such notice following the adoption of the decision. Thank you. We will now open the evidentiary hearing for item DA 8, 2023 on today's agenda. Casey, will you come introduce that for us?
Just to confirm, you'd like to call Matthew Morris home?
No.
I will not then. To who?
That's hilarious. What is he going to be an expert in? Yeah, right.
All right, so this is DA 8, 2023. The subject property is located at 8401 Falls of Neuse Road. The property is zoned commercial mixed use, 3 stories with the parking limited frontage, and it's in the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District. The applicant is proposing to construct a general building for a new car wash facility on the property. And they are requesting a design alternate to reduce the build-to that's provided along the Falls of Neuse Road. So build-to is the area where a certain amount of building facade is located along a street. In the parking limited frontage, the build-to range is between 5 feet and 100 feet from the right-of-way. So within that depth from the right-of-way, in this case, at least 50% of that must be building facade must comprise at least 15% of that frontage width. And there are 3 design alternate findings that are required in order to grant a build to design alternate request. Happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Thank you, Casey. The applicant will now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request.
Good evening.
Evening.
I'm Tom Johnson with the law firm of Williams Mullen at 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1700 here in Raleigh, on behalf of the applicant. And I have Tony Chilton here, who's the architect on the project, to speak to our request. This is a very narrow lot that fronts on Falls of the Noose Road. There's an existing car wash that really doesn't provide anything but a brick frontage facing the road, and we're replacing it with a modern, up-to-date car wash. But the challenge is the width of the lot and being able to do the car wash to orient it on the lot so that we can provide access and easy access in and out of the site. We did come up with an alternate that's consistent with the adjoining properties, which are automotive uses, particularly an oil change next door that has the garage fronts facing Falls of the Noose Road, just like what we're proposing. But we did come up with an alternative proposal to put what we call wing walls, but to give that width with some walls that don't have conditioned space behind them. So I'm going to have Tony come up and talk about that in particular, but wanted to basically orient you to what we were asking for and what the challenges were. So Tony, why don't you come up and be sworn, and you can share with the commission our request.
Tony Chilton, 101 West Lebanon Street, Suite 102, Mount Airy, North Carolina 27030.
In your relation to the case? Your relation to the case?
I'm the architect.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay.
So, to continue with the information that Tom introduced, it's an existing car wash, which is predominantly manual stations with one small automation at the end that's antiquated. So to replace that car wash with an automated, automateds are linear. The car moves through the tunnel. That's the primary functioning space. Usually 100 feet is the minimum that you're going to see. You can get a few feet smaller, but you start pushing a lot of the functions to the outside of the building. So the linear operation is a minimum length. And then there's a turn space that you have to get your car aligned and to get in, and then an alignment once you come out and then make your turn. Then there's the equipment room, the equipment space that's with all the pumps and the electrical gear and so forth that is stacked on top of this in order to create the two-story look as well. Then there's a smattering of small spaces, an attendant, a restroom, a pallet lift, a small space for a washing machine where they clean the towels, and then there's a small reclaimed pump room. And then out in the yard, underneath the pavement, is all of the reclaimed tanks that takes water from the spray and then recycles it back in for the spraying of the underneath of cars. But most of the activity is centered around this primary space, the 20-foot approximate by 100-foot space. Based on the lot dimension, the area in the middle, the bluish green, that is your primary space. We did look at whether we could create some additional program requirements by taking outdoor activities, the pay station area and the vacuum area, and turning that into a build-to type space that is conditioned, but it's not economical or ecological to do that. It would add at least 50% of the cost of the building construction to the overall project, which would make it an unfeasible project to begin with. So the objective is trying to create a front The red areas that you see, those would be wing walls. On the right-hand side, if we rotate the image, what's on the right is the street side, to help create a front look, but not enclose the pay station or the vacuum areas, because this, again, is an automobile facility, not a pedestrian facility. So this would be the normal facade that you would see from the street. It's very narrow, it's a tunnel. And then the highlighted red areas to the left and right being those wing walls that partially hide, but still see the vacuum areas behind it. And on the right-hand side would create a portal for one of the pay station drives to come through at the pay area. What you see on top would be a view from two views from the street, looking at the facility with those walls. What you see down below is some of the neighboring facilities. The one on the bottom left is the Quick Lube area, and on the right is an office area that's across the road. And that's what we're proposing to do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions for Tony? I mean, our position is that we're trying to meet consistent with the intent. I mean, we understand that the walls can't have to be conditioned to be a facade under the definitions on the ordinance. So we just added the walls to give the width to meet the intent of the ordinance. And it's consistent with what's already there. I mean, you already have an oil change place next door, which looks substantially the same to what we're proposing. And we're upgrading certainly significantly what's already there and making it much more appealing than what you see there. I mean, the ordinance speaks to pedestrian accessibility, pedestrian friendly, and obviously the third finding is it won't negatively impact pedestrian access. I mean, this is not a pedestrian facility. This is an automotive use, and people drive their cars in and get them washed and drive them out. So really, pedestrian accessibility is a pretty minor part of the whole facility. But by what we did, we certainly looked at addressing the intent, but yet preserving what everyone what you see around town in terms of a tunnel car wash. So we're happy to answer any questions, but feel pretty clearly that we meet the requirements.
Were the wing walls included in your submittal to the city when you got this comment originally?
They weren't initially, and we made the modification and resubmitted those with the wing walls.
Okay.
Because we looked at alternatives, and when we were told the definition as a facade has to have conditioned space behind it, looked at that option, but that's just not feasible with what we're doing here. So we have since submitted it with the wing wall request.
And it's not feasible because you need vehicular circulation on both sides?
Vehicular circulation, and I mean, does it make sense to condition a space where you've got vacuums where people have to vacuum their car out? I mean,
right.
So we had to have space for that. And on the other side, the pay station, it's a whole lot easier that not be enclosed conditioned space when people come in and pay to go into the car wash.
So if you may have said this, but if you included the wing walls in the calculation, do you meet the requirements?
Yes. That was the whole purpose of adding the wing walls, was to meet the requirement for the frontage at the build to. And if you look at the facade, say, of the Quick Lube next door, it looks very consistent with that.
Is there precedent for this kind of wing wall solution for these facilities?
I have, no clue about history in terms of whether anyone's tried this before or not. But we thought, in consultation with the architect and the engineer, that it made sense to do that, to provide that width that the ordinance was looking for to meet the intent. Maybe Tony's familiar with one, he's done it before. I'll let him speak to that.
not to a car wash itself, but there is some precedent for in the city of Boone, where they've done wing wall continuation of an existing facade and did a parking garage behind it, and it helped create the streetscape and helped tear it down to the street, so it wasn't from a pedestrian point of view. It was a little more friendly.
It's interesting, a lot of times we'll have cases like this come to us that use landscape treatments like trees and other site walls to create the effect of a build-to, to meet the intent of build-to, and not something, I've never seen something like this as an approach. It's interesting.
So it would be possible on the left side, which is parallel to a vehicular parking space. There is a landscape area there that something like that could be done. But on the right-hand side, the property being limited in space, you have 2 lanes that need to come in and have your queuing area for your vehicles in front of the pay station. Then you turn and come into it, and then you exit out. There's not enough space to move things around to create the landscape on the right-hand side. It would impede the vehicular traffic that you have a limited amount of space to get all these little parts and pieces, and a big percentage of that is for automobile. And a tree and a car don't exactly go together in the same lane. But the parallel to the parking space, that could be an option on one side. But to create a balance, it looked better to go ahead and think about it with a building. And then in front of that wall on the left side, I could easily see some smaller landscaping to tear it down.
Okay. Thank you.
And Tony did a good job explaining that. It's a matter of creativity to try to meet the intent of the requirement, given the situation with the lot width.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the commission? I don't see anyone from the public. Anyone from the public here? Hearing no additional questions or presentation of relevant facts, the commission will now close the hearing and bring the matter to the table. Anyone have any initial thoughts? I'll just roll into me having initial thoughts. I'm not really, I am not very excited about the strategy here to meet build to. I feel like we've just got these big fake walls that I would say aren't really consistent with the adjacent uses or form, maybe in their placement on the site, but I would almost rather see landscape do a similar thing, but be interested to hear what other folks thought.
I mean, I'll agree. I don't particularly care for the walls from an aesthetic appeal and the intent.
Yeah. Let's see.
Adam, have you looked at the landscaping plan?
Let's see. I haven't.
It's the last page in the submittal. There are dwarf Fothergilla.
Yeah.
I don't know how tall those get, but those are what's planted in front of the wing wall on the left-hand side.
Mm-hmm.
You know how tall those get?
Yeah, like 3 or 4 feet.
I mean,
Not a bad plant
no,
selection.
Alternatively, if you wanted landscaping, it could be done on that, facing it on the left-hand side. But the right-hand side, because of traffic, it'd be
Yeah.
hard to.
Tom, I appreciate it. We're close.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
And then how tall do the
vintage
vintage
jade.
jade get?
Not very tall.
Okay. I mean, I agree with your comments about just seems odd to have a couple wing walls hanging out there trying to meet the intent of a 50% building facade along the frontage. And I wonder, I actually have a question for the applicant. Can we open it back up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
If you didn't have those wing walls, would you keep the height of the main structure as is, or would you change that?
The main structure would remain as it shows here in this rendering.
Okay.
The
Seems
two-story
tall.
structure.
Is the height needed for the equipment inside?
It's for the equipment that's above. Tony can speak to that maybe more particularly. Let him talk about it.
Yeah, by the time you meet the minimum requirement to put the tunnel equipment in itself, and then your elevated floor, and then headroom for an operator to be on the next level, you're at approximately 17 to 17.6 in that range as your bearing point for the trusses for the roof support. So that becomes a minimum. You have a certain amount of humidity that builds up in a car wash, and then you have, ideally, you would like a car wash to be as tall as this for one story, but you're already reducing it down to get your second floor with your equipment on it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You can close it again.
All right, we'll close the hearing for deliberation again.
I mean, without if you take the wing walls away and with the building that height or that high and that narrow, the proportion does seem a little
It does seem off. Yeah,
a
I
little
think
awkward, but again,
yeah.
I just don't know that two random wing walls is meeting the intent of the code.
Yeah, I don't either. I could see the one that's set back, because at least that one you won't see the side of it nearly as much when you're driving by. But the one in the front, people are gonna look down the side of that wall and kind of understand that it's this fake wall that isn't really functional.
Yeah, and on the left side, I almost prefer some larger landscaping items to.
You certainly need something to anchor the two-story skinny tower thing.
Yeah.
Catherine, were you gonna say something?
I don't know that I have that much to add. Just like, yeah, the wing walls are really awkward. And they work if you're facing it straight on, and if you're looking at it from any other angle, it looks awkward. It'll look weird. It would even just be different if it were just an open deck. If there's just a ceiling and a back wall, and not even enclosed, but that would make it feel like an integrated piece of the building as opposed to this.
Yeah.
Is it possible to amend the request?
We're still close.
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't think the wing walls meet the intent here. I'm not really interested in approving something like this and setting a precedent that this meets the intent of Build 2, that the facade walls meet the intent of Build 2.
Agreed.
I think if there was a different strategy that did something with landscape or more, form following function of the facility and landscape, something better than this, I think I would certainly be more amenable.
And personally, the wing wall on the right-hand side, I could take or leave.
Mm-hmm.
It is set back from the face of the building. It's the one on the left-hand side that sits proud of the building that just, like you said, you're going to know that it's a wing wall. Like there's no substance to it from the side of it. So I would prefer to see landscape over that on that side, personally.
Yeah, or something creative that's not that.
Yep.
Anybody have any thoughts or advice? Hearing what, I'll open the case. Hearing what you've heard, would you like to continue this and kind of come back and present something else, or how would you like to, would you like us to make a vote on this?
I mean, we want to have something that we can move forward with. If we need, I mean, if we can't do a verbal amendment at this time to change what's on the left-hand side and make it landscaping, put a landscape island there with taller vegetation. I think I was hearing that the one on the right-hand side, that's not preferable, would be okay, because we really can't put landscaping there since vehicles need to drive through it. So, you know, we could eliminate that completely and just do landscaping on the left. We wouldn't meet the width requirement, but, you know, we could do that.
Well, you know, we certainly have seen cases that meet the build to width requirement with landscape creatively, and, you know.
How are you seeing it where you address the gap where the vehicles need to drive through?
On the right side? I don't think that's as much of a sticking point for folks here. But yeah, I don't think I would be comfortable with a verbal amendment. I think I need to see something, see of how you envision this.
Yeah, it would feel like we're trying to design it, right? With some sort of condition put on this. I would think we would need to see something be proposed back to us. But I would think, just as some guidance, I think some taller landscape plantings on that left side instead of a wing wall would be my preference.
Okay.
I don't know what those plantings are. I don't know what would work well in this environment. But I'm sure if you came up with a revised planting plan, our landscape architecture friends would be able to help us with that.
Yeah. Certainly, it doesn't need to be a screening planting, you know, like arborvitae or something. We're not trying to create a vegetated wall. We're trying to create the feel of build to. So that could be deciduous canopy trees alongside low landscape elements. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like the picture on the lower left that shows all the trees more or less hiding that Valvoline facility.
Yeah. And maintaining some build to.
Yeah.
And obviously on the right-hand side, it becomes still more of a challenge because of visibility and putting anything, although something that's taller, I guess you could see around it, but you have a hard time with traffic coming out. Obviously, it's easier to put plantings up closer to the building on that left-hand side that won't obstruct visibility and won't be a safety hazard. So that's why the right-hand side is more of a challenge, but I guess I'm hearing from the board that that's okay since it's set back. You're comfortable with what we've done on the right.
Certainly,
it's just the left, you'd rather see landscaping than that.
Like Chris said, I don't think we want to be too prescriptive with this, but certainly because the wall is set back, I think we're all agree that it's less egregious, and but landscaping in front of that wall would be interesting as well to create that build to and kind of bring it up even more.
Yeah.
You know, some narrow columnar species would be helpful.
And with regards to the wall, the right wall, if you're already needing to come back to us, I think it's probably worth thinking about. Are there other elements with regards to that wall that could potentially be looked at to make it feel like less of just a facade, just a wall that help it fit in with the rest of the building? Because that's, at least from the plans and how they look, it sticks out a bit from the building just by nature of it being just a blank wall.
Yeah, if I can share my thoughts, it's kind of building on the same thing. Like, facade literally means face, and so the one on the right kind of can kind of pass as a face because it's so set back, but the one sticking out just looks like a wall that's floating. And so, to Will's point, if it's less floating out in space, I think it'd feel less awkward.
Okay. And there is a, if you can see from, maybe we can go back. You do have the portion that does stick out on that right-hand side further back. That's part of the equipment. If you can see this portion right here. So it does that, and you've got a little more height and transition on that right-hand side. And that is set back from the front, so that's not even with the front, that's back. I mean, this is a 2D picture trying to show something 3D, and that's where we pushed it back to, is consistent with that. So I'm hearing more vegetation, potentially more interest, even with that right-hand wall, maybe doing something to make that more interesting. Just trying to summarize what I'm hearing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes it a more compelling case, for sure.
Okay. All right. And I appreciate that. I really do. It's just the challenge of taking a narrow use and putting it on a narrow lot and trying to make it fit, which is a challenge. And it didn't make sense to make it. I mean, if it had been made all a building, it still would have had somewhat the same look. But there would have been building behind, and I get the point coming from the side, that you wouldn't see building. So I think there are ways we can address that, and if we continue it, just continue it to the August agenda. Can we do that?
Yeah, we can do that.
And I think we should be able to address it in fairly short order. I mean, we've got good feedback, which we appreciate that tonight.
Yeah.
And we should be able to come back with something pretty quickly and easily to address that.
Yeah, great. Just looking at this planting plan, and it looks different than what I'm seeing in the renderings. Anyway, just address that. Make sure your planting plans
Make the planting plan's consistent
very
with what
clear,
we're trying to do. We'll double check all that and make sure that we're accurately portraying what we're doing. Because we do have, are adding a good bit of landscaping, but certainly have no objection to adding more.
It's the city of Oaks.
I know. Well, and given what I'm hearing, if landscaping being an option, that's fine. It certainly looks better and probably less expensive than building the wall. So.
Great.
All right. Go ahead, Tony.
Economically, they may be able to accept one less vacuum station.
I was just looking at that.
Yeah.
I think that might be.
That they look at to see if that it's feasible and there's a minimum number that you need to serve everyone. But we have a bigger cause here.
Yeah.
And if we reduce one of the spaces, then that would potentially pull that back more in line with the end of the building, even with the trees, so that it doesn't protrude out in front.
Yeah, I think I was just looking at that and saying, man, it would be nice to kill one of those vacuum stations and fill it with landscape or something. I mean.
Wait, to be clear though, were you suggesting pulling the wall back?
No,
Okay.
it's just a landscaping back, so it'd be more even.
Just wanted to be clear.
It was
on
not
that.
the wall.
Okay. Got it.
And then I guess I was hearing that we may, and I'll leave that up to Tony, now he can design it, maybe some narrow vegetation to break up the other wall, potentially.
Help tear it down.
Yep. Yeah.
A portion of it that's solid closest to the building could be tiered down. The portion where the 3-foot, the pedestrian access to get to the bathrooms from someone who's at a vacuum station comes around, and then there's a drive for one of the pay stations. That has to be kept as an open lane, but the portion from there to the building, we could potentially do some more landscape there to help soften it. Give another level of interest out in front of it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, keep being creative and see what you come up with, but
Be as creative as we can. We tried this time, and that was our goal, was to try to be creative to try to meet that width requirement, but now we understand what the commission feels about it.
Appreciate your presentation.
And we'll be back. When is that next meeting?
It's August 3rd, right?
Casey,
August 3rd? Okay.
is that enough time?
Yeah, we'll be able to get
All
that
right.
addressed in that time. That's not a problem.
Well, sounds good.
All
See
right,
you then.
thank you.
This case will be continued to the August 3rd meeting, and the commission's written decision will be adopted when the minutes of the meeting are adopted. All right, I think that is all of the cases we have for this evening, and that closes the quasi-judicial portion of this evening. We do have some minutes to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all for being here tonight. Appreciate your time.
I do have one quick thing. So this will be the last time I see you guys until December, most likely.
No way.
That's the way it works out, the timing. It's going to be 4 months. So 4 meetings. David York in our office, Attorney David York, I think he's probably sat with y'all before, is going to be filling in. So if you have any questions, you can welcome to email him, just like me, and he's all up to speed.
Okay, thank you for all you've done for us.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing y'all at the end of the year.
Thanks, Catherine.
Do something.
Yeah, totally.
Send an email.